So in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the workflow needed to move a Rhino 3D model to 3D Studio Max and then ultimately into Unreal Engine. Each of these softwares have the kind of unique set of tools that make them better or worse at doing certain aspects. And I'm not an expert in all three, but I'm pretty good at modeling in Rhino. In 3D Studio Max, texturing, texture mapping, that stuff seems to be the easiest place for me to do that. And then ultimately Unreal Engine is where we compile our VR scene. So in this Rhino model, which I've used before for V-Ray, it has all of the layers of the Barcelona Pavilion. Everything's been modeled in a way that's cleanly made geometry and then definitely layered in a way that helps us move this process through. So under the travertine walls, I actually have the base and the floor. Everything here is all grouped under one sublayer, which will help us in 3D Studio Max make sure that our material mapping is all the same. If I looked, turn off the roofs here, if you look, we have three of the kind of iconic granite walls. Each of those is a sublayer of itself, and because these will be receiving different materials, it's important to keep them separate. I find it's easiest to map things and then move things all the way through into Unreal Engine as long as that object in Unreal is going to be receiving the exact same texture. So I'll want all of my travertine to be one object. That's easy. But the granite walls will be independent objects. All the glass can be one object. All the mullions can be one object. And we'll get started with doing that right now. So here in Rhino, I'm going to take everything, select it all, and export. On my desktop here, I've got a folder, Rhino to Max to Unreal. And under this, I like to kind of layer my work. So I'm going to say this is Rhino to Max is the first step. And here I'm going to just put Rhino to Max. And we're going to use the FBX file type. So down here, let's find it, FBX Motion Builder. FBX carries all the geometry and also all the layering. So that's something that we can use in 3D Studio. So I'll send this out. We're going to be using mesh models. I'll say OK. And here you can see, if I preview it, Rhino will automatically mesh things for me. And this level of meshing is good enough. We can add more meshing in Max if we want. If I really wanted to, I could control more meshing here. We don't get a whole lot more. If I said fewer, you can see there's fewer facets here. Until we get to a spot where we have lots and lots of mesh facets, it's not really a concern. So just the middle default is fine by me. So I'll send that out, and then I'm going to open 3D Studio Max. So if you're unfamiliar with Max, it's lots and lots of layers and buttons. Over here we have kind of the three big ones, which is Move, Rotate, and Scale, and that's tied to the W, E, and R key, so W, E, R. Over here we have the Create kind of tools. So this is where if I wanted to model some piece of geometry in 3D Studio Max, I could do it here. I'll delete that. Coming up here, we have our selection. This is just the arrow. It's super easy. And we also have select by name. So we have nothing in the scene right now, so there's no way I can select anything, but we can also come in here and select stuff. Over here, you can see that this is where our layers will be. This is where all of our objects and geometry will show up. And I can turn off what kind of things we look at in those layers by saying I don't want to look at lights or cameras. We won't have any of that because we're just importing from Rhino. So first thing I'm going to do is to go to File, Import. This little drop out over here will let me import non-native file types. So I'll take that. On my desktop, I have that folder, and we have Rhino to Max FBX. So I'll import this, and the one thing that we talked about in class, and we'll see again here, is that the direction y-axis and z-axis are a little flipped. So when we look at our model here, it'll be turned on its side. The other thing to look at here is we have 171 elements, which is fine. We're going to move those and unify them so that we have to texture less pieces in Unreal Engine. So say OK. There's our model. You can see here on the front view we're actually looking at the top of it, and everything's a little bit off. We'd like to rotate this. So if I went to my rotate tool and I clicked on the red axis here, I could drag this down and move it around, trying to get it to snap right into place. And I'll never quite be able to get it to negative 90 degrees. So I'll undo this, edit undo. I can actually right click the rotate tool, and that lets me numerically enter it. So on the x-axis, I'll say -90, and now my object is rotated into space correctly. I'll go back to my selection tool here, and I want to enlarge this perspective view. So down here on the bottom right, maximize viewport. In Max, if I middle click, I can pan, and if I alt middle click, I can rotate. The other thing we see now is also this kind of object layers are all populated, and that's something I can select. So if I came in and looked under travertine, we have the base layers, and then we have all the objects under the base. So if I shift click and select all of those, I can actually right click and isolate this selection. So now I'm only looking at those objects. If I right click again in space here, I can end the isolation. We'll see everything comes right back. So now that we have our geometry rotated into place and we know how we can move around it, there's just a few modifications we need to make to this geometry so that we can be prepared for Unreal Engine. To do this, I think it's best that we take a look at, say, let's just pick one of the base objects, this front wall. It says here that we're working on an editable poly. This is in the Modify tab. So here's the Create tab, next to it's the Modify tab. And this object number 10 is an editable poly. I have lots of different operations I can do to this editable poly. The only one I care about right now is I want to attach it. I want to combine everything that is of that same material, of that same scale. So here I can click Attach and click a different object in the scene, but I can also say Attach List. And I'm going to use the list because for me it's much easier to select. So we're not attaching any of the frames, we're attaching travertine. And everything underneath the bench, the walls, the stair, and these two travertine walls is what we want to attach it to. So this one all the way up to this one. So I'll attach. Now you can see everything's highlight. Click that. That's everything. That's all of the base. It's still named Object 10 because that's where we started out, but I can just rename it. Now this is the travertine object. Pretty easy for us. I'm going to right-click the travertine object. I'm going to hide it just so it's easier. We can maintain what we're working on. Now I'll take the roof. This is again an editable poly, and I'll click Attach. We only have one other roof, so I don't need to use the list. I'll attach it to this roof, and I'll rename it Roof. Click Attach again to undo or get out of the Attach command, and now our roofs are attached. I'll hide that selection. Let's do the glass. So this is glass, glass, glass. We have a few pieces here. This time it's an editable mesh. It's not a poly. And so our tools down here are a little different, but once again we have Attach and Attach List. So I'll click Attach List. We're not attaching the frame. We're looking at glass, so it's these objects here, and attach those. Those are all one thing. Name this glass. Click the glass and then right-click the glass. We'll hide selection. Now these walls are special walls, right? So we have object 50, object 41, and object 40. So let's call this G wall 1. We're keeping these separate. We don't need to attach them to anything. This one here is G wall 2, and this one here is G underscore wall 3. Now, if I really wanted to, I could attach them and I could apply special filters and different channels so that I can control their materiality separately. For me, it's easier just to keep them as independent objects. So here's wall 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to hide these. Let's do our crucible columns. So this one here. We don't need a modifier yet. We're going to come down. This is a poly, so we'll go to the list. And under the top layer, crucible columns, we'll attach all these. Rename them crux call. Now that they're one object, I'll hide this. Let's see if we can go take a look at the statue. So the statue and the base are separate. That's fine. Let's just attach them manually. So we'll attach this to this to this. Statue, and get out of attach, and I'll hide this. The frames. This one's the kind of complicated one because we have a lot of detail in the mullion frame. And when we explode this and we do the next step, it's going to take a little bit, but I'll fast forward through that portion. But same system here. We're going to attach the list under frames. All of these frames get joined together, and we're going to name this frame. And we can come back to the frame and hide it. Let's attach manually. We'll attach the 2 planes of water. Get out of the attach command. I'm going to name this water. This one will hide, and then these are the rock base. So these are rocks. Attach and hide. So I hid absolutely everything. That means we've joined it and grouped it the right way. I'm going to unhide all now by right-clicking in the middle of the screen and unhide all. Now I have to go through and prepare unwrapping. We talked in our class a little bit about why we go about doing this, and the analogy I tried to use was that in Unreal Engine we have kind of the diffuse material. That would be, say I was wearing a jacket, a coat, and it's a blue coat, and that's how it looks. I put it on and I'm wearing this nice coat. Additional to that, we have a secondary invisible coat that lives right on top of that coat that allows for light and shadow to be embedded within that invisible coat. So we create 2 unwraps of this to allow for the VR simulation to work well. So under the Modify tab here, the modifier list, there's lots of modifiers, but I can type unwrap, and if I go to unwrap UVW, here I'm working just on the roofs, UVW, I have lots of different tools. Once again, there's only a few we're concerned with. One is that the map channel here is now set to 1. That's going to be our diffuse. That's the way the coat looks. I'm going to open the UV editor, and you can see I have all of my geometry. Some of it is overlapped on itself. So if we think in the analogy of a tailor, if I make a pattern and I lay it out on a bolt of fabric, I cannot cut a portion of the sleeve and a portion of the collar out of the same piece of fabric. So we need to unwrap these and lay them out so that they don't overlap. In fact, here if I come to select, I could say select overlapped polygons. Let's see, it didn't seem to do that. Here, select. No, there certainly are overlapped. Let's start here. Let's go mapping, flatten mapping. This will rotate and fill holes and normalize. So now we can see they're definitely not overlapped. Select overlap polygons. Nothing is selected at this time. So let's see. I wonder why it wasn't doing it before. This is what we want. We want everything orderly and neat. You can see that checkerboard background in the back. That's kind of identifying UV space of 0, 0 all the way up to 1, 1. That's just what we need for Unreal Engine. So with this, I can close the editor here, and I'm going to just confirm that on the unwrap, where are we at? Channel 1. That's perfect. Nothing more we need to do here. If I come back, oh, I'm still on the select face, so that we'll just get out of this. What I was doing there is in the editor I can select vertices, edges, or faces, and because I was still in the selection thing, I couldn't interact with my geometry. So I just click the button again and I'm out of the selection. This object we're going to unwrap one more time, but this time we're going to set our channel, map channel. Sometimes it gets confusing. We have material ID channel. We don't need that. We want map channel. This is going to be on 2. We're going to move that mapping, and we'll just take a look at the UV editor again. It should be exactly the same as what we had just done, and it is. So we'll close this. Really, right there, we'd be good to send to Unreal. We have our unwrap done. But there's one additional thing I want to do. Let's come back up here. We'll get out of the polygon selection, and I can just click this. I also want to UV map this piece of geometry so that when I do apply materials to it, it has a scale. I can change my UV mapping slightly in Unreal Engine, but I think it's best to set up that UV map here. And just in order to see it, sometimes it's helpful to create a texture that we can actually look at. Right now we just have all diffuse gray. So if I click the M key in 3D Studio Max, it'll open up the Material Slate Editor. I'm going to right click and go to Maps, General, Checker. This is just creating a checkerboard. I will right click again and say I want a Material, General, Physical Material. This then plugs into this. So this is my material and this is just a map. So here I'm going to plug this into, let's see, my base color. Then I can right click on this material and I want to tell it to show in shaded view. I can also say show unrealistic. And then when I have my roof selected, I can right click this material in my material editor and assign to selection. what that lets me do is see how this is tiling. And obviously I see here that we don't have many subdivisions for our UV, for our texture, and if I were to apply something right now, we'd have really big pieces of material. So let's change that. If I hit the modifier one last time and go to UV, I'm going to add UV mapping, not this add, but UV map. And for the most part, I would say that most of the architectural projects we work on are going to need a box map. A box map lets us control all kind of 6 sides. And I like to set these to be fairly uniform. So here, if I set this to 50 by 50 by 50, I can see now I have much more tiled checkerboards. If I really wanted to get in there deep, I could say 5 by 5 by 5. Now I have a lot of checkerboards. And that's just going to allow me to kind of control the amount of tiling on the material when I apply it. So with that, I'm going to fast forward through this section of video. I'm going to do the exact same process. I'm going to unwrap twice each piece of geometry here. I'm going to UV map with a box map, and I can apply a checkerboard just to watch it. So this will take a little bit of time, especially for things like the frames. There's lots and lots of pieces of geometry that need to be unwrapped there. But if I give the computer a little bit of time, and I'm going to be saving often just to make sure I don't crash, I'm going to UV map all of these elements. And I'll see you on the other side. So one quick note here. As I was moving through this, I realized these 3 walls, actually the textures I'm creating for them are uniquely scaled to fit these walls. So instead of doing a 5 by 5 by 5 box map, I'm actually just going to fit my texture map to these objects. So here, let's just do this one really quickly. I'm going to unwrap. Same thing as before. Open UV editor, flatten, OK. This is channel 1. We'll do it one more time. Unwrap, move it to channel 2. We'll double check to make sure it's unwrapped right. It is. It's great. And then when I add my UV map, I'm just going to say box map fit. That's all I need to do. That way, when I apply this special texture, it'll map perfectly corner to corner. All right, now I'll keep going. Alright, and with that I have everything unwrapped and UV mapped, so I will unhide all. Some of these objects received that checkerboard texture, some did not. I think the other thing you might notice is that our normals are not all unified. So if I look here, I have a checkerboard there, but not here. And that's something we can deal with in Unreal Engine. Similar with the glass and these travertine walls, some of the objects I just didn't throw the checkerboard on. The checkerboard is just for me to see that the thing's mapped and scaled correctly, but not a big deal. So here I will select all of this geometry. One interesting thing we look at is that there are little gizmos here. These are the groups. So this is just the thing that holds from Rhino. We don't really need these. We only need this stuff. The other thing I see is that my objects are very, very high. Because I rotated this, we moved it away from the origin, and that's okay because this is something, again, we can move in Unreal Engine. So with this stuff selected, let's see, it looks like I got a group over there too. I don't think that even matters, so I'll just select this stuff here. File, export, export selected. I'm going to go to my desktop, to the folder, and then this time I'm going to create a new folder that's Max to Unreal. And under Max to Unreal, I'll say Max to Unreal. Let's get a capital in there. .fbx. We're using the fbx file type again. So we'll save this. All this default stuff is fine. It'll take a second. It says, hey, some of the textures and materials, which are the checkerboards, I can't save. That's fine. We don't actually need it. We're going to replace it. And now we're on to Unreal Engine. So in the next tutorial, part 2 of this, we'll be looking at how we work in Unreal.